welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your serial killer, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your Zodiac suspect, Jackson Keller.
But are we sure is the real question. Are we sure you're the Zodiac suspect? I'm only about 80%.
Considering that I'm not Ted Cruz, I'm like 100% certain I'm not the Zodiac killer.
You know what? Fair point. I do always forget that Ted Cruz is out there and is definitely the Zodiac killer.
I was actually thinking about the Ted Cruz meme while we were watching this. I was like, I know it's a bit, but I was like seriously evaluating it as far as like, would Ted Cruz be like intellectually capable of doing this? And I think the Zodiac killer is at the exact like perfect intersection of like competence and schlubbiness that makes Ted Cruz at least like mentally fit the profile.
And at one point while we were watching Zodiac, we're watching Zodiac in case you weren't aware, they did say, somebody made a quick quip about like, oh, we're cruising along. And I'm like, oh, there it is. Ted Cruz. It's Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is the Zodiac killer.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
We got him. So yeah, we're watching Zodiac this week. This was my pick just because I have a weird relationship with David Fincher in that I always feel like I haven't seen a lot of his movies. And then I look through his oeuvre and go, oh, wait, I've seen a decent clip of his movies and generally like the movies I've seen. I can't think of one that I don't like. I just keep forgetting they're David Fincher movies. So for my pick in this free-for-all month of just movies that we've been meaning to get around to, we're watching Zodiac, a movie I've seen half of actually at one point, and then turned it off because I didn't realize it was 2.5 hours long. We started it at 11 o'clock, and the girlfriend fell asleep while we were watching it. So,
yeah, I had never seen Zodiac either. I also have seen a lot of David Fincher movies and have enjoyed the vast majority of them. The only one that I didn't so much care for was the Dragon Tattoo movie, and even that was like visually very well done. I think you're onto something. Like, the interesting thing about David Fincher is that he does have a pretty particular style in a lot of ways. Like, I watch this movie and I'm like, this is definitely a David Fincher movie, but it's like, aside from Fight Club, like, I feel like Fight Club is kind of in the public consciousness, like the definitive David Fincher movie. But like, there are a lot of other ones that are, really acclaimed, really popular even, The Social Network, my Fred Connor's personal favorite, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. There's Gone Girl.
God, Benjamin Button was a Fincher. Is that a good movie? Honest question. Is that a good movie?
It's a good movie. I don't think it's a great movie.
Okay, your hesitancy leads me to be unsure.
It's like it's not. I enjoyed it.
All right, I guess there's your resounding "I enjoyed it" from Jackson.
Yeah, my buddy's really into it though, so take that how you will. Dear viewers, dear listeners. The funny thing is, I don't think there's any David Fincher movie aside from Alien 3, which he has disowned.
Oh my God, I forgot that was a Fincher film too. Every time.
To be fair, one, he has disowned it because of so much like executive meddling, and two, it's not the most illustrious way to start your career. Although I personally am a defender of Alien 3. You could go listen to that all the way back when, if you so please, dear viewer.
We have a lot of weird Alien hot takes. If you are, for whatever reason, just now joining us on this podcast,
I think between us, we have like every possible Alien hot take under the sun, because I don't think anyone sims for Resurrection.
Resurrection eats ass.
But regardless, so I haven't like rewatched any of his movies, although there are lots that I really, really liked. I too really liked Fight Club in high school. I really liked Social Network, but haven't seen it since it came out in theaters. Gone Girl I saw more recently, and Gone Girl is fucking great. If gun to my head, I would probably say that's my favorite Fincher movie that I've seen. But Zodiac has made me more curious to go back and revisit some of these. Fight Club in particular, because I think that there's a lot of connections to be made here in terms of like thematic ideas and style, and this idea of kind of being smart but also having your cake and eating it too. And that's all to say that I very much enjoyed Zodiac. I thought that this was really, really excellent. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I got, and what I got was actually amazing. So
I really, really enjoyed this as well. I had somewhat of an expectation for what I was going into, having watched half of it years ago, at least 5 or 6 years ago, because this was while I was still in college that I saw it. But I at the time, I've said this many times, and I will continue to say this, I was a bigger dum-dum than I am now.
At least it's an upward trajectory. That's the important thing.
I would like to think so. I would like to think so, though I can't say for sure. But I remember back then, I'm like, oh, this is interesting, but I don't think it really grabbed me in the way that it did this time. Because this time I watched it, I really, really liked it. The first half is very suspense-filled, very dramatic, and very interesting. It brings in all the characters and makes you care and find them fascinating to just kind of watch and try and understand, before the second half kind of dumps its ideas on you, to say, as Jackson has, it takes its cake and fucks it too. Although I go with fuck. I don't know why. I think Jim Sterling said that at one point. I cannot separate that phrase anymore.
Only Jim Sterling could debase us so.
So yeah, I really, really liked it this time. I think it's a very solid movie. And then like the final 10 minutes are what really, really sells me on it. The final 10 minutes of this movie are utterly brilliant and really kind of drive home everything it's been quietly building up to that point.
Yeah, and I guess for that particular theme, we can call that spoilers. This is a weird movie to be spoilers because it's about a real thing, and it's not about a real thing like a Tarantino movie where Tarantino just says, fuck real life, I'm going to do some weirdo shit at the end. This is a movie about a real thing. So spoilers are a little weird, but I think that structurally the movie is very interesting. It's very unusual because it's a pretty long movie, 2.5 hours. And the first half is very traditional kind of thriller, very traditional, like really gets at what people enjoy about this true crime stuff. Like you're trying to solve the mystery, like you're the Zodiac killers, playing a cat and mouse game. Reminded me a lot of a contemporary to this that we also talked about before in some ways. Old Country for No Men. I think there's some similar
No
parallels.
Country for Old Men? Do you want to take that again?
Wait, what?
I think you said Old Country for New Men.
Oh. So Old Country for New Men. We're gonna keep it. But no, No Country for Old Men is, I think, a movie that has similar thematic ideas, just more, just since it's fiction, kind of more through that action movie sort of lens. Whereas this is more explicitly, I think, examining our relationship with media about serial killers, why we're so obsessed with true crime. And I think the wires cross really well on this one because the Zodiac killer is, he's like the closest thing we have to a real life like cartoon villain, and that this criminal mastermind who taunted the police and got away with it, and the case has never been definitively solved. And I think that sort of mystique, that he maybe has, plays really well to the broader point of how the killer ends up being actually characterized, which I don't know if we want to talk about now or in post spoilers, for lack of a better word.
Let's save it for post spoilers, I suppose, because I think we can talk. We can continue to talk very broad about this movie, because I want to really quickly jump off and talk about some of its contemporaries today, such as Serial and My Favorite Murder and other. We have a very big push right now for serial killer focused media. It's huge in podcasts. American Vandal on Netflix did a really good job of kind of parodying the whole thing. It is a surge over the past couple of years. I feel like it's died down a little bit recently. But I think that like this idea of serial killers as a whole is something that has become very popular in the American zeitgeist. And what a lot of these properties do today is kind of set everything up, leave it up to the viewer to decide, but still very much plays into a narrative. And so like you kind of end up making a decision either way, just because like no film is able to isolate itself from its directors, its writers, what have you. There's always going to be that influence on it. But I think what's absolutely fascinating about this, and I was watching it all the way through because I'm very much aware of how we as a society are viewing serial killer media and like trying to see where this movie was spinning it, like where its allegiances lie, where it was pointing things. The movie in the back half, without, really diving too far into it, does a really amazing job of showing that it is also aware that the stories it tells influences how we perceive the events that are happening. And I think that this is something that was done in 2007 and really needs to be more taken up in serial fiction or about murders and whatnot today, because again, everything that is produced has some sort of bias, whether it is intentional or not, but none seem to deal with it as well as they did in this film, which handled it just beautifully and felt incredibly natural and wonderfully fascinating as far as the conclusion and cap piece to this film.
It's so interesting because in a traditional like thriller narrative, like the thriller ends with a big confrontation with the killer and whether or not they get caught, like, depending on what kind of movie it is, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but there's some sort of climax. And I think that's one thing I'm sort of thinking about while I was watching the movie. And I think it's something the movie wants you to be thinking about as well. How could they possibly end this? Because we know that the Zodiac killer isn't going to be caught. So like, how are they going to play the climax? And how is this all going to shake out? And I think that's an expectation that the movie plays with very wonderfully, like on top of a lot of other strong things that it does about like the ethics of reporting on these ongoing crimes, the relationship between the press and the police, this issue of, how much should the public be aware? How much are we sensationalizing these things? And sort of the ethics of that, the murky gray area of like justice that results with, the police getting caught in a tangle of bureaucracy and like all these checks that exist, in theory, 3 underlines and heavy, quotation marks around in theory, that in theory exists to protect the public from like police misconduct. And this is something I think the movie is also really aware of because Dirty Harry is prominently featured in one scene, and the characters even remark like, this isn't just Dirty Harry. I can't just go up to this suspect who I'm sure, is my suspect because I'm the hero with my gun and like shoot him and take him in. So in that sense, like those conversations about like how we handle policing and how we handle justice, although not like directly related to the issues of today, are still resonant, still prescient for a movie made during the Obama era about like, the 60s. Really well done. And I think that's just a testament to how strong the movie really is.
I mean, it even dives into just how we handle evidence gathering and whatnot, because there's a lot of evidence that is just now not admissible in court. I mean, DNA evidence is largely faulty. Handwriting is completely bunk. A lot of the things that the movie utilizes is even commented on within the movie, being like, yeah, we use this, but what the fuck does it mean? Like, it might help for some supporting evidence, but even then it can very easily wrongly convict someone for something that they had nothing to do with. Or it could very easily let someone get off the hook when they are in fact the person who did it. It knows exactly what it's doing, and I think that's incredibly impressive just because so many other things have come out since then that does not have the same awareness that Zodiac does.
It's so interesting. Like, I only ever hear this movie kind of mentioned in passing when it comes to David Fincher. Like, usually, you know, the big ones that get brought up in conversations about him are like Fight Club and Seven and like Gone Girl. But this deserves all the recognition to be recognized as like a classic thriller. And I think it still is a thriller despite all of the nonfiction elements. And I think that the nonfiction elements only make it stronger with regards to how it is both using the genre of the thriller and how it is like subverting a lot of those things, because there are just a lot of super tense scenes, like that cold open with the couple at like the makeout point. Holy shit, the way they build that up, and then the scene with the woman and her baby.
Oh my god, the woman and the baby is actually where we stopped watching the movie last time.
Holy
Fun
shit.
fact. Yeah, I think we both kind of hit the point where like, man, I'm falling asleep, and this movie is incredibly like way too much right now.
I am too exhausted to watch the Zodiac killer attempt to murder a baby right now.
Yeah, that was where we're kind of yeah, we're good. We're good for right now.
I'm piecing out on this one, Chief.
But yeah, I mean, it is incredibly tense, especially like it's so. The fact that it manages to be tense is incredible in and of itself, because we all know what's happening. It's the Zodiac killer. He's gonna kill people. Why is this tense? And yet, it's still incredibly tense just based on how it's shot, how it's edited. Everything about every scene lends itself to being surprisingly tense, despite the fact that we know exactly how it's gonna go down.
That's a really good point, and I think that like there should be a class for any poor fool who's attempting to write like a prequel or a movie about like a real life event that everyone knows, where they sit down and like immediately disabuse people of the notion that you can't make tension to something that you know the outcome to, and like use this movie to illustrate how you build that tension regardless, because that's how you know it's a good scene, when you know you can either watch it again or like you know what happens in the first place and you're still like, you know, digging your fingernails into the seat and like, you know, feeling your skin crawl. Like that's that real tension right there.
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, even the ending still got me rather tense, and I'm like, there's no way that X is going to happen, and I'm not gonna give away what that is, but I feel like if you've seen the movie, you probably understand what I'm going for here. So like the movie still has a wondrous amount of tension intertwined throughout, despite being based on a true story and everything that entails.
And speaking of tension, like that really does seem to be something that Fincher is really interested in as a director. And this is one of the reasons I want to go back to Fight Club, because one of the biggest criticisms of Fight Club is that it's a satire that has its cake and eat it too. That it's supposed to be kind of this teardown of like 90s ennui, like Rage Against the Machine masculinity. But a lot of guys walk out of the theater saying, wow, Tyler Durden is so cool and I want to be just like him.
Fucking snowflakes.
Snowflakes. Yeah, I mean, snowflake has unironically become a fucking political term. I think that, especially in light of this movie, that's super interesting, because this movie is so obviously like trying to get you swept up in the drama and then, you know, yanking back on the choke chain and like examining that and whether or not you find that to be a effective directorial tool. I think overall that I do, but I think there's no denying that it's a tool that Fincher really, really loves to use. And I think you see this a lot in Gone Girl as well, which that manifests a little differently because it is fiction. But that also plays around with like sympathies and like who you want to root for versus who you should be rooting for. He's a very smart director is what I'm trying to say here.
Honestly, I would go one further than saying yanks back on the choke chain, and I would say it outright condemns the viewer. And I would say, honestly, from what I have seen of Fincher's oeuvre, he likes to condemn the viewer for making assumptions. Like,
yes.
He likes to set up these assumptions that, like, make sense. Like, okay, this person is definitely the killer, this person's definitely the killer, this person's definitely the killer. Are you sure, though? Do you really want to say that? Do you really want to condemn that? And like Gone Girl, where you start to form alliances with certain people, and you're like, oh, Neil Patrick Harris is here. He's great. He's going to make oh, God, no. Like, he does a wonderful job of making you think something and then condemning you for thinking it. And I think that that is a very hard line to ride, to do that and not come across as shitty and pretentious. But Fincher does a very good job at it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like it really gets at, with this genre in particular, I think one of the reasons that it works so well is like there's something, in order to say something more definitive, like more intelligent, I'd have to like think about it more and do research. But I feel like there's something.
Let's do research for this podcast.
No. But thinking about it, like there must just be something about us like wanting to play amateur detective that is like universal to the human experience, right? Like there's a reason that if you go into a bookstore and you look at the biggest shelves by far are mysteries. Mysteries take up like all the space, even though like the tropes of like mysteries and thrillers are so well known at this point. Like everyone wants to be that sort of detective. And I was thinking about it a lot too, because we are big Danganronpa stans around here. And that's like half the fun of Danganronpa.
I also have watched a ton of like police procedurals, not like the CSI shit. I like mine to have a twist on it. You see, I like the Sykes and the pushing daisies and shit like that. But like, that's the same thing where like, I like watching to see, who done it. There's something interesting about that. And, propaganda aside, we're not going to delve into that, although it is worth noting that we are aware of it.
Yeah, it's relevant, but not. There's a really good video by Jack Saint about police films. I'll recommend that in lieu of trying to say anything.
We are not adequately prepared to say anything about that, other than it is noted. We are moving past it.
Yes. I think like, cause it's funny because that impulse, like on its face, like, oh yeah, people like to try and solve mysteries and like do puzzles and stuff. And like that's on the surface, that seems like such an innocent thing, but this movie makes such a good case for like why that mindset like is so detrimental both in our legal system and like culturally, and like what sort of hidden damages it can have, and
personally and socially, and like that it condemns all of it, man. Let's not stop it, just legally. Like it is that man collapses in on himself like a dying star.
True. Oh my god.
Do you want to talk spoilers then?
Let's get more into specifics, because there's a lot to go over here.
Absolutely. So before we do, as always, if you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review on iTunes, tell friends, follow us on Twitter at BADHcast, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. Next week, we're going to be talking about two films that are actually just one really long film. It's Kill Bill, because I haven't seen enough Quentin Tarantino, and this is what Jackson chose to make me watch.
Yes, I'll elaborate more on the thought process here, but part of it was just that of Tarantino's films, I think the only ones that I haven't seen at this point are Kill Bill, which is one of his biggest, most famous, Jackie Brown, which hardcore Tarantino stans really, really go for, and I do want to watch it, but it's not, from what everyone says, it is not the best like thing. If we're gonna show Sean like what a Tarantino film is like, I don't think your first impulse is to go to Jackie Brown. And then Death Proof, the one he did for the Rodriguez collab.
I believe that's Death Proof. Yeah. In Grindhouse.
I haven't seen that one either, but I wanted to see something new. Kill Bill is a prominent enough Tarantino movie that I was comfortable letting this be Sean's second Tarantino experience. So come back to see how that turned out.
The first being Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was an interesting decision, to say the least.
Well, you know, who could have known that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood would have been so much about itself? Literally anyone who watches Tarantino films, is every Tarantino movie is about himself and his movies.
See, I wouldn't know that, though. That's why I was just like, yeah, let's watch that. We can't talk about this. We'll talk about this next week. Now, let's talk about spoilers for Zodiac. Where do we want to begin with this?
Since we kind of started on the Ted Cruz riff, if I may, I'd like to start on what I found interesting about like the movie subject of the Zodiac Killer in particular.
Please get us going,
because I think it'll lead into the broader point about like the condemnation of this true crime obsession really well. So what I found really interesting, like early on, even before the movie kind of shows its hand, is like how it presents the Zodiac Killer. And the reason that I mentioned Old Country for New Men was that movie does something very similar, a lot more heightened, in that you have like this Joker level supervillain, and Anton Chigurh, who has these really like tense scenes and this really like memorable personality. And, no spoilers, but the movie kind of seeks by the end to kind of take him down a peg. And I think that this movie does something even like really similar that's arguably even more effective, because it follows, the real life case of the Zodiac Killer so closely, because you're watching it. And, the Zodiac Killer in particular, I think, has a lot of mystique precisely because, he was never caught. Like, we all know about Ed Gein and John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer and all these guys. But, like, those stories end with them, like, getting caught. And, that's part of the reason that they're so famous. We can name them. But with the Zodiac Killer, like I mentioned, the fact that he taunts the police, like he has these elaborate ciphers, like he's setting himself up to be a cartoon villain. And the fact that, like, when you actually look at his actions, it's so strange, because he's obviously intelligent and competent to a degree, in order to set up all these ciphers and like plan for all these contingencies. But when it comes to his vocabulary and his writing and his spelling, very unimpressive. He doesn't look super intelligent. When it comes to the murders themselves that we see, like these aren't, speaking of Danganronpa, these aren't Nagito like galaxy brain plans that the police can never figure out.
Like any good American in the year of our Lord 2020, I do also have a favorite serial killer, and I can confirm that the Zodiac Killer is no H.H. Holmes either. Like, there are actual serial killers that were way more interesting than Zodiac, but I think it's pretty much because he wasn't caught that he's interesting. Sorry, continue. I needed to bring up the fact that even as far as serial killers go, he's not that interesting. He didn't have a trick room in his house during the Chicago World's Fair years back where he was dismembering bodies and selling them for parts before getting money back and then doing it more. H.H. Holmes is way cooler.
Oh, I love it. But yeah, that's the thing, is that like, his actual murders are basically just like put on gloves and shoot a guy. Like, he's got a big dumb costume.
The costume is wonderful.
It's so weird because like that actually happened. It was part of an actual tragedy. And
I couldn't believe it. I genuinely refused. I thought it was going to be a twist that like somebody was, taking up the mantra, like somebody was like Batman taking up the cowl or something like that. But no, it was probably actually the same dude who dressed up with the symbol on his chest like a goddamn superhero.
No, it's crazy. And that situation ends with such horrific tragedy. The suspects, like especially the main suspect, are all just like these schlubs. And when you think about it, serial killers in general, if we're examining what we find interesting about them, is that I think especially in movies, like the serial killer is played up as this criminal mastermind. And there's something too, like they even call it the golden age of serial killers, the early 20th century, before these crimes were a lot harder to get away with over a sustained period of time, thanks to like advances in technology and stuff.
As to the validity of those advances in technology, Continue. I need to sneak in a little bit that is literally in the film itself as well. So
Right, sure. But the thing about these serial killers is that like they do get these mystique. Like it's so weird that we were watching this movie in particular because I was just having a conversation on stream with people. Like people love their serial killers not just by like finding them fascinating. Like people simp for the Columbine people. Like people write fan fiction about Jeffrey Dahmer and shit. Like it's
utterly upsetting.
It's fucking strange. And when you get down to it, like the way that like the serial killer is a brand as like a fictional character, and it is a fiction, I think, as this movie goes to show really well, is that like, you know, these are, you know, super geniuses with these like grand schemes that are 300 IQ outwitting the rest of us normals. But for the most part, they're just violent schlubs. They're just violent assholes who deserve to be put away.
Yeah, completely agree. And the movie does a very good job at condemning those of us who are enjoy serial killer lore, so to speak. I mean, it's very weird. I think the fact that I'm even struggling to be like, oh yeah, I enjoy reading about serial killers says a lot about serial killer culture as a whole, because it's a bizarre thing to be interested in. It's disturbing. There's something about it that is inherently repulsive, and like the movie kind of knows that, but also kind of knows that you're gonna read it anyway, aren't you? And you're gonna be influenced by what people are saying and what people are doing.
You all want your hog slop. You know, David Fincher's got the slop. He's pouring it into the trough for us. Eat, you hog.
Here's the first half of the movie. Enjoy your corn and other things. And oh no, you've gotten underneath it and there's bones? And now you don't like what you're looking at? Well, too bad. You're already invested in the movie. You're gonna see how it ends. Oh, what's that? You're the serial killer? Well, no, you're not the serial killer, but you are guilty of finding these people fascinating when you really probably shouldn't, because nothing good can come of it, even if you do solve the murder, quote unquote, solve, quote unquote, the murder. You know what? It probably won't help. And even then, it's so tricky to actually pin it down that you can't say for sure that you have solved it. And like, this is what basically Jake Gyllenhaal's entire character is about. The man goes down a horrifying rabbit hole where he literally forgoes his entire family to write this book that ultimately kind of leads to the rearrest and questioning of Andrew Lee. I'm totally blanking on the dude's last name, but the dude who is presumed to be the Zodiac killer. And the final scene even has the gentleman, before he questions the survivor of that first shooting, open his briefcase, and his book is right there. And like, the idea that this book of somebody who definitely did the research, absolutely, is influencing police and the work that they do, says an incredible amount about the power that storytelling has and the construction of a good narrative. I want to say it was Serial. I could be wrong, but that podcast also got somebody arrested. Again, I don't know for sure it was Serial. It might not have been Serial. I don't want to definitively say it, but I know there's a podcast like Serial that got somebody arrested through the research that they were doing. And there was a lot more evidence for that gentleman to get arrested in connection with his crime, but it was a lot of the narrative that was being spun. And so stories can be created out of nothing, and the movie even goes out of its way to show that. One of my favorite scenes is when Jake Gyllenhaal goes to prison to interview one of the people in connection with the original murders, and he's like, his name was Rick though, right? You're thinking of Rick? Rick though. Rick? And like was really trying to pull the name out, just really underscoring how the narrative that he is constructing in his own head feeds into what he is writing. And had she not corrected him, like, I think it was Lee, and emphasis on think, everything in this movie is based on hunches and like 80% sure, this novel could have been entirely different, and Rick Marshall could have been arrested instead of the gentleman who kind of was 20 years later. It's such a fascinating indictment of the people who follow it and the stories they create and the people who believe those stories and track them down and take them as gospel, essentially.
And I think what makes this condemnation like all the more effective, and this is why I'm a pretty big fan of the, like, when it comes to satire or critique, I think to some extent you do kind of have to do the thing to make it like really hit home, because the movie, you know, when you're sitting there listening to this, spin those stories, when you're sitting there watching, they're pretty compelling stories a lot of the time.
That first half, I was spending the entire time trying to figure out who it could be. I was right there with them.
That's the thing too, in that like it's such like a morally murky gray area, because that's always Jake Gyllenhaal's character's excuse, is that like, you know, hey, I'm a Boy Scout, like I just, you know, want to see justice prevail. And like, yeah, it is important that we do bring murderers to justice, but at the same time, like, that's why, again, in theory, there should be like rules and systems in place and laws to make sure that justice is actually being served, because really, without those systems, even the police are just basically Jake Gyllenhaal, like running around making up a narrative that'll suit their stuff, even if they don't have smoking gun evidence.
And they do that in this film, even, where they're trying to find the narrative that suits what they are getting at. And again, it's hard to say for sure whether they, you know, were connecting dots that weren't there or not, because a lot of things coincidentally fell into their laps. But that doesn't make for a full case. They were clearly connecting narratives that they thought were there. They were positive it was Rick Marshall for so long. But hey, look at that. Oops. It maybe wasn't.
Oh, fuck, man. Just the weight of false justice and you know, people constructing stories, like, it just hit me all of a sudden. I'm like, man, there is no hope for this world, dog.
Oh man, this was not supposed to be a Void episode. You know that? You know that, right? Like, I realized that we literally picked a movie about serial killers to not be a Void episode, but I had figured that it would be a movie about a serial killer that hasn't been around for 30, 40 years. We would have been in the okay territory. We can't do this week. We can't.
The movie was too sophisticated. We can't help but stare into the void. No, I mean, because that's the thing. I think that's one of the like underlying cultural things that make this movie's condemnation of, you know, let's call it what it is, serial killer culture. I think that's what makes it so effective, because like when I think of, I mean, fuck, like schlocky shonen manga, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, one of the most like well-regarded villains is the serial killer of JoJo Part 4. And like, it's all for the same reasons that other serial killer fiction is, and JoJo is so fucking stupid. Like that it almost makes the idea of a serial killer, it seems almost ridiculous that like there are these people who do these horrible, cruel things basically for kicks, like a lot of them. I mean, we've talked about criminal psychology before and like what light reading I've done on it and stuff, but broadly speaking, there is at least, you know, strong evidence that a good contingent of, you know, people like this are doing it just for kicks. And it's like heavily implied that people even question the Zodiac killer's motives along those lines in these movies. Like, oh, is he just playing the tortured, like mentally ill narrative because he knows that's what the public wants to hear and he just likes being in the spotlight? Or does he really just like, you know, murdering people for kicks and being in the spotlight and just having a grand old time? That's the fucked up thing about this world, is that, you know, human beings are complicated little nightmare creatures, and we don't want to accept that some of us are just like anime villains, but some of us are. Anime villains, like shitty anime villains that you don't particularly care for either. Like, you can't find the motivation behind them. They're just like, I kill people because I am evil. And that sucks. Like Dio, one of the biggest mustache twirlers in all of anime, explicitly based off of serial killers. Dio probably has more sensible, coherent motivations than a lot of actual criminals. Because at least Dio has that I've been stomped on by society, so I want to be at the very top thing going on. A lot of people don't even have that.
No. It's all bad.
Hell is empty and all the devils are here.
Oh man, we should. Is there anything more that we have to say about? Like, this is weird. We're way ahead of schedule right now, but Zodiac feels like such a tight little number that, like, I don't know what more there is to say about it. I mean, I feel like we've covered the fact that it condemns itself through its own usage of like unclear methods, and even says like, hey, the conclusions that you will reach from this are potentially untrue. Do not believe everything that you say. That's some utter brilliance right there. We've talked about serial killers. We've talked about Ted Cruz. Like, what the fuck else is there?
No, it's funny because I feel like this is kind of where we were at with Strangelove as well, and that like this is a movie that makes its point so well and with such class that you can be really concise in describing it. And I'm sure that there's more that we could say if we like sat down and like analyzed particular scenes. But like in the broad strokes, these are the things that the movie gets you to think about. And it does a really good job at getting you to think about them. But thinking about them makes my head hurt.
I mean, that's the other thing too, is like, this is definitely something that I could see myself sitting down and writing a whole thing about. Like, I could easily jerk out a couple 100,000 words on this and just talk about like various scenes and how they all lean into one another. But we're not really a scene by scene podcast, with some notable exceptions. Godzilla. So like the grand thesis from the film, it's so crisp and so clear that like, we don't even have we're not even arguing about it. Like, normally one of us would be like, well, you can interpret it this way, but we're both just like, yeah, no, I mean, that's it. It's brilliant. I don't know what more you want from me.
This is a movie that very clearly had a vision and an intent and executed on it arguably flawlessly. I don't know what else you can say about more than that.
Yeah, it's like, here's my gym routine, and it stuck the fucking landing perfectly. I mean, I can't even come up with anything that I could say really negative about it. That's the weird thing too, is like, just in general, while I was watching it, I never really found anything negative to say about it. Like, I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, that it was weird that didn't happen, but usually you can kind of be like, ooh, I don't know that I dug that decision, or that was kind of weird. Just small little things to nitpick, but like, I don't think that there was anything even there for me to nitpick on. Like, everything just felt perfect.
This is definitely a movie where so much careful thought was clearly put into it that it really does just have a mission, and it executes on that mission. Yeah, I was really blown away by this. I was not expecting to like be as into this as I was, but like, here we are.
Yeah, and here we end?
I guess so.
Yeah, sorry it's a shorter one, but I mean, we're not gonna keep beating this dead horse. Heyo. So yeah, sorry it's a short one, but you know, when there's nothing more to say, we're not gonna keep saying things, because that's just as bad content, and you don't want that.
Brevity is the soul of wit. If it's good enough for Billy Shakespeare, it's good enough for us.
Billy McKinda. I've been Billy McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. This is coming out on Thursday, which means literally the day before I have just dropped an article all about the bodily horror of relationships, in which I talk about The Thing, I talk about Annihilation, and I talk about Michael Fife's Panorama. It's a graphic novel that just came out that got me really thinking about this stuff. It goes with some weird places that literally, it opens with me talking about how I have been warped and twisted in the 6 years of my relationship, and that is terrifying, but also a very good thing. So, I mean, buckle up, y'all. It's a wild ride for you.
It's gonna be great. It's gonna be excellent. Y'all better fucking read it, or I'm gonna poo-poo you on Twitter, which you can find at Jackson J. Keller on Twitter.
You know what? That was a better transition than I was expecting it to be. I will not lie to you.
We're gonna leave it at that, folks.
You can follow the podcast on Twitter at BADH_cast. It's mostly where we post episode updates and stuff like that. There's not a whole lot of exciting things going on there, but you know what? You might want to know what's happening. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/BADHcast. At only $1 a month, you can access to our Discord where you can yell at us for having too short of an episode. You want to listen to our dulcet tones for an extra 15 minutes, which if you want more time listening to us, $5 a month gets you access to our backlog of bonus episodes. We've got a bunch of them out there. They're all really, really good. They're all really, really interesting. Highly recommended. $10 a month gets you access to everything you've heard before and the ability to request bonus episodes. So if you've got something in particular that you want us to talk about, that's the way to get us to do it. We've talked about some movies that we never would have otherwise. That's how you'd recommend them. Also, you get a little something, something.
Julia, Travis, Pat, Autumn, Summer, by your powers combined, I'm a beating a dead horse patron. Thank you so much, everyone.
Y'all are wonderful. Also, thanks to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can, however you can, because right now they're obviously not doing concerts. So, like, stream them, buy their music digitally, whatever you got to do. Please support them.
Support musicians generally. I got a lot of musician friends, and COVID's being especially bad for them. So if you like music, you gotta do your part.
Just support the arts in general. Honestly, the arts are really suffering right now, guys, and you want arts. Whether you know it or not, you want arts. Support the arts.
The arts are literally the only thing making your quarantine hell COVID existence tolerable. Support the arts, you hogs.
Yeah, otherwise it's just all Twitter. And no one wants that.
Without the arts, we are literally the opening workers from fucking Metropolis.
And you know who does a really good job of writing about the arts? That's right, it's 25 years later site.com. Not only am I on there with my interesting bodily horror and relationships article, so is a bunch of really, really talented writers. You should go read all their stuff, and we got a little button on there if you want to find us. You can do that too. Next week, we're going to be talking about Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. It's going to be my second Tarantino film, and Jackson's umpteenth, I assume.
For the record, I have not seen Kill Bill, which is surprising because it is one of Tarantino's more like iconic popular movies, up there with Pulp Fiction probably. I've been thinking about my Tarantino opinions a lot recently, and I think they're somewhat controversial, but we'll get to that next week. We'll see how I feel about Kill Bill. Maybe not.
Ooh, I'm excited to find out. But for now, bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go